Hey, good morning, church. How we doing? Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Hey, I am Pastor Scott. If you're new here or if you're new online, if you're new in-house, I am the teaching pastor here at Waterbrook, and you're walking in on the end of the movie because we are finishing up our series called Adulting today. And how many of you, before we get started, how many of you is digging the cold weather? Yeah. Yeah, I've been praying for it. Don't boo me. I'll pray for snow. All right, so it's coming. I've been praying for snow too, but Buffalo got it, so we missed a little bit. We need to get a little further south. Hey, we've been talking in this series, adulting. Adulting is just a modern term. It's used by Gen Zers. It's used by millennials, and it just basically means that you're doing stuff that's mundane. You're doing stuff that's tedious. Some of you have been doing adulting for 30, 40, 50 years, and you didn't even know what it was called. But you've been killing it the whole time. But it's just the idea behind it all is that we need to take responsibility. There's this thing about responsibility in our lives, and we talked about this the first week, that when God created Adam and Eve, he created them to be responsible. Matter of fact, before the law, before the Ten Commandments, before even sin came into mankind and made its way into the world, before kingdoms, before earthly governments, before any of those things, God gave man 3 different jobs: to be fruitful and multiply, to name all the animals, and to take dominion over the earth. And with those 3 jobs, he gave us responsibility. Now, that's why when we're fulfilling our responsibility, we feel the happiest about it. When you've put in a hard day's work, when you're doing the jobs that you're supposed to do, when you're fulfilling the task, men, when you're behaving as the spiritual head hold of your household, ladies, when you're fulfilling your task in what we're called to do, that's why we have a tendency to have more peace, to be more joyful, and to be happier. Well, if you flip it over on the same side of the coin, that's the exact same thing that happens too when we behave irresponsibly. We don't have that peace, we don't have that joy, and we don't have that happiness. Now, one of the things that we talked about last week was there's this thing with irresponsibility, and it can come into our lives when we start comparing ourselves to others. And what I mean by that is that it's easy when we compare ourselves to others to sometimes give ourselves a natural out, or to give ourselves an easy out. And that kind of looks like this. It's like, well, I'm not doing as good as this person's doing in my life. I'm not doing as good as my boss is doing. But if I'd been given the breaks that my boss had been given, if I'd been given the opportunities that she had been given or that he had been given, if I had been given those things, then I could be right there too. But I haven't been given those breaks, so I'm where I'm at right now. But at least I'm not as bad as these people. At least I'm not as worse off as them. I'm better off than them. I'm not where I want to be, but at least I'm better off than them. And what that does is it gives me an out to be complacent, to kind of stay exactly where I'm at and to not push it any. And we've learned that when we do that, we give ourselves too much of an out, and it helps us, or it enables us, to become irresponsible. Now, one of the first things that we talked about the first week, I gave you this question, and I had all of us say it. All right, it says, "Am I taking responsibility for my life? Really?" So here's what I want to do today. I want to give this a little bit of attitude. Okay, now here's what we're going to have to do, y'all. I've got a 14-page sermon, and it's right here in my head. And I got a 6-page sermon, and it's in my head. And if I think you're getting it, I'll automatically switch to the 6-page sermon. If I don't think you're getting it, I switch to the 14-page sermon. Okay, so are we there? Yeah. We sure? Yeah. Okay, now, I want this to have some attitude. So here's what I want. I want the ladies. Okay? Ladies, I know since y'all are all fine, upstanding, proper ladies, that you don't get a lot of chance nowadays to show attitude. So I'm going to, as your pastor, and more importantly, as your friend, I'm going to give you the chance to show some attitude. And I want you to say this with me. Now, here's what you got to do. You got to tap into that adolescent 14, 15-year-old girl that lives in every single woman, okay? And you got to do this. Cock your head to the side and go, really? All right, you ready? So ladies, on 3. 1, 2, you got to cock your head more. Cock your head more. 1, 2, 3. Really? Say it with some attitude, like you're mad at your husband. Really? You said what? Really? Yeah, really. Now, let's stick it on the end of this. Here it comes. Am I taking responsibility for my life? Really? There you go. Give it some attitude, because here's the thing about this question. We have to say it with some attitude in our lives, don't we? Because it's so much easier to look out the window at other people than it is to look in the mirror and say this to ourselves. To say it to ourselves, am I taking responsibility for my life? Really? Because it's so much easier in our lives to look at other people and how they're behaving irresponsibly, and to point our fingers at them, at that group, at those people, at my boss or my coworkers or that person. It's so much easier to do that than it is to point the finger at me and say, am I taking responsibility for my life really? Are there, in every area of my life, am I taking responsibility for it really? Now, here's where I want to go today, and I want to turn the corner with us a little bit. And here's where what I want to do is, how many of you in here are parents? You have kids, okay? How many of you are kids, and you're in here this morning? Okay, all right. How many of you wish you were still a kid? Okay, so that covers everybody, all right? Now, here's something that every single child in the whole world has said before. And here's something. And it doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter when you were born. It doesn't matter what country you were born in. It doesn't even matter what time period you were born in. Every single child has uttered these words. And every parent in here, when you were a child, you uttered these words. And every single grandparent that's in here, when you were a child, you uttered these words too. And this is where we're going today. And this is a parable that Jesus speaks into. But here are the words. That's not fair. That's not fair. Right? How many kids? Now, there's probably been a kid in here this morning that even said it this morning. I got to go to church? Oh, man, that's not fair. And it doesn't. And you're like 45 years old, and you're a kid, all right? But here's the thing. What do we say to our children when they say that? That's not fair. We say, life's not fair. Now, if you're from the South, you put a little extra gravy on the biscuit when you say it to your children. And you say it like this: get over it. Life's not fair. And don't be belly aching, or I'll give you something to bellyache about. That's how it was in my house, right? Unless you're a grandparent. Now, grandparents, they do this. Oh, come here, baby. Mom, granny will make it fair, right? Or grandpa will make it fair. We'll make it fair for you, because, listen, there's a point of us, there's a part of us in every single one of us. Even though we know life's not fair, even though we know that life's difficult, even though we know that there are going to be times and periods in our life where it seems like we come up on the short end of the stick every single time. And we tell our children life's not fair. We preach it to ourselves that life's not fair. We see examples of it every single day, don't we? That life's not fair. But there's a part of us in every single person that we want life to be fair, don't we? There's a part of us, even though we realize life's not fair, that we come up on the short end of the stick sometimes. There's a part of us that we still want life to be fair. I want it to be fair for my wife. I want it to be fair for our children. I want it to be fair for when we eventually have grandchildren. Not too soon. But when we have grandchildren, I want it to be fair. And I think we all want it fair. Here's where I kind of land with this. And I thought about it some this weekend when we were with family and gathered for Thanksgiving. It's not so much that life isn't fair. It's that we want life to be even, don't we? We want life to be a little bit more evened out. If you get certain breaks, then I should get certain breaks. If you get a certain opportunity, then I ought to be able to get a certain opportunity. Why? Because we all want life to be evened out. We all want the same amount of opportunities, but here's the thing. We know that life's not like that, don't we? We know that life doesn't behave like that, does it? Because life's not even. Life's not fair. Now, here's where, when we talk about the fairness of life or the unevenness of life, here's where it comes into play for us when we talk about responsibility. The unfairness of life can quickly become an excuse for irresponsibility. Would you agree with that? Yeah, because it works something like this. Well, I came up on the short end of the stick in life, so I'm not even going to try. We've seen people do that, haven't we? We've experienced that. Maybe we've even experienced it in ourselves. But when we talk about irresponsibility, there is something neat that tends to happen, and I don't even know if we give it a second thought. But when it comes to irresponsibility, just because you came up on the short end of the stick doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to end up irresponsible. I know a lot of people that ended up on the short end of the stick that they're very responsible people. They didn't have the best childhoods. They didn't have the best families. They didn't have the best upbringing, but they're very responsible people. Now, here's what we have a tendency to think, though. We think, man, if I had it all, if I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth, if I would have been born and my daddy would have had a lot of money, if I would have been born and I would have had the opportunities, the extra chances, the extra breaks, the extra good looks, like my pastor, if I'd had all those things, right? If I would have had those things, then things would have been different for me. Not necessarily. Because we know people that have been given silver spoons in their mouth and they behave very irresponsibly. We have a tendency to do that with stuff, though, don't we? Any extra stuff that we have a tendency to waste it. If you have extra time, you'll what? You'll waste it. If you have extra money, people will spend it frivolously. If we have extra opportunities, sometimes we don't take advantage of them. Why? Because anything extra that we have that we don't need, we have a tendency to waste. So just because you were born on the short end of the stick, or just because you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth, is not a safeguard for you and I when it comes to being irresponsible. Because we know just as many people that were born with a silver spoon that ended up irresponsible as people who didn't, that ended up irresponsible. So it's not a safeguard. That's why the question is so important when we talk about it. Am I taking responsibility for my life? Really? Here's another question that we need to ask ourselves because of this factor, that we know life is uneven, that we know life isn't fair. Here's a question that comes into play. What am I going to do with the hand that I've been dealt? If you came up on the short end of the stick, if you didn't have the upbringing that you needed to have, if you didn't have the parents that you wanted, if you didn't have the education that you wanted, it still falls on this. What am I going to do with the hand that I've been dealt? If you were born with a silver spoon, if you were born with having all the breaks, having all the extras, the extra opportunities, the extra breaks, the extra money, what are you still going to do with the hand that you've been dealt? Now, Jesus, 2,000 years ago, this is so incredible to me. 2,000 years ago, Jesus taught a parable on this very subject. And he talked about playing the hand that you've been dealt. He talked about the unevenness of life and even the unfairness of life. And here's one of the things that's brilliant about Jesus' teachings. When we look at this parable, and a parable is just a made-up story, and that's what Jesus did this a lot. He made up stories to prove his point. In this parable about the unevenness of life, about the unfairness of life, spoiler alert, Jesus doesn't try to rectify it. He doesn't try to justify it. He doesn't try to make it even. It just is what it is. And Jesus speaks exactly about this idea of the unfairness of life. So if you've got your Bibles this morning, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 25. All right, if you don't have it, we're going to throw it up on the screen for you. Are you guys ready? Okay. Is it all right if I tie my shoe? Because it's bugging me. All right, here we go. I'm going to read the scripture and tie my shoe all at the same time. Pray for me. All right, here we go. Again, it will be like a king. It will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. So this is a parable, and because in real life this wouldn't happen, would it? If you had a bunch of money, you wouldn't pick 3 of your friends and say, or 3 of your coworkers, or 3 of your employees and say, hey, I'm going to give you all my money. We wouldn't do that, would we? Or would you? Because if you would, I want to see you after the service. But here, this is what's really neat. This Greek word right here for entrusted is the Greek word permisiatos. Permisiatos is where we get the English word permit from. Well, the English word permit comes from the Latin. The Latin comes from the Greek. So we still got cheese. It just came from a different cow. Does that make sense? So this word means, though, it means permitted, permisiatos. It says, so again, a man's going to leave on a journey, and so he gives his servants and he permits them to handle his wealth. Now, when he permits them to handle his wealth, he's not giving them the money for them to safeguard. He's giving them the money to handle it exactly the way that he would handle it. He's entrusting it to them to say, I want you to do with my money exactly how I would handle my money. So this is where the story, so he gave his wealth to them. The story continues. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to other 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. And then he says, then he went on his journey. Now, some of the versions, I think in Luke, and when it tells this story, Luke tells it with talents. He says he gave 5 talents to one, 2 talents to another, 1 talent to another servant. A talent in biblical terms is just a unit of measure. It was usually anywhere between like 40 and 75 pounds of whatever we're talking about. But in this particular story, a talent would be about 20 years worth of work for a day laborer. Now, if you translated that into today's money, it would be about $300,000. So a talent is about $300,000. So he gave 5 talents to one, 2 talents to another, 1 talent to another. Let's see what happens. The man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 more bags. So he went, he's moving, he's shaking, he's wheeling, he's dealing, he's a commodities trader. He's doing whatever he has to do, and he's taking this money and he's handling it just like his master would. So think about this. If a talent's worth $300,000, then he was entrusted with what? $1.5 million. And so when he doubled it, he ended up with what? The first service, like last night, they were all like, but it came to what? See, y'all know that because y'all have had more coffee in you, so you're more aware. So he gains 5 more talents on top of the 5 talents he had. So he ends up with 10 talents or 1.5 or $3 million in all. Then let's see what happens with the second one. So also the one with 2 bags of gold or 2 talents gained 2 more. He had 600,000 large. And he doubled it, so he ended up with what? $1.2 million. And then we get to the other servant. But the man who had received 1 bag, he went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. Now, when Jesus is telling this story to his first century audience, everybody in the audience went, what? Oh, no, he didn't. And they're like, yes, he did. Because listen, if you were just trying to keep the money safe, you wouldn't dig a hole and put $300,000 worth of gold in a hole in the ground if you were trying to keep it safe. So everybody in this audience that's listening to this parable, that's listening to this story, and Jesus says, for the kingdom of God is like this, they are all sitting now on the edge of their seats. And they're all kind of diving into what Jesus is saying because here's what they want to know. They want to know what's going to happen to this particular servant who has taken his master's money and dug a hole in the ground and put it there. But here's how the rest of the story plays out that Jesus is telling. And remember, it's a story. So when we hear this story, here's what some people think. Well, it wasn't fair of the master to give 5, 2, and 1. He should have evened it out among all of them, shouldn't he? I mean, wouldn't that be fair? And Jesus says this, get over it. He was from southern Galilee. So, he was like, get over it, because that's the point of the parable. The point of the parable is this: not everybody gets equal opportunities. Not everybody gets life that's been evened out. Sometimes you just have to play the hand you've been dealt. So here's how it plays. After a long time, this in the Greek word, when it's put together, the word picture right here is of a woman in labor. And I don't know this, but women, you can probably attest to this. When you're having that baby, you want it to just be done. Am I right? I'm just guessing. Am I right, honey? Yeah. So this is like a long time. It's like the doctor coming in, ladies, and you just started the birth process, and they're like, it's okay. You've only got 36 more hours of labor. And you'd be like, I want this to be done. But it's going to be a long time. Matter of fact, it means he's so far overdue, they wonder if something's happened to him, if he's ever coming back. So after a long time, the master of those servants returned, and he did what? He settled accounts. So he's not giving them the money as to safeguard. He's saying, I want you to handle it the way that I would have handled it. Now it's time to settle up. What'd you do? Settle up with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold, or 5 talents, brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me, there's our word, permisiatos, you permitted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. Isn't that what we all want to hear one day? You have been faithful with a few things. I think that's funny that Jesus thinks 1.5 million is a few things. I'm like, I'd like to have some of that action. You know what I'm saying? Jesus, can you throw a few things over this way? A few things. I will put you in charge of many things. And I imagine the master going like this. Come and share in your master's happiness. Let me give you a big old master bear hug. You've gained me $1.5 million. I love you, boy. Y'all gonna get that? The first service got that a lot better. Okay. Share in your master's happiness. Why is he happy? Why is the servant happy? See, I think this servant was doing this. He was looking every day. Is that him? Is that him coming over the hill? Is that him coming? No, that's not him. Oh, that looks like him. That looks like him. Because he couldn't wait for his master to get there. Why? Because he himself was happy. Why? Because he had been responsible. And every time we behave responsibly, we end up with joy and peace and happiness. Sharing your master's happiness. Then he goes on. The man with 2 bags or 2 talents of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me, you permisiatos me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. Come here, boy. Let me give you a big old bear hug. Now, here's what I think happened, and this is just my mind, and I'm reading in between the lines. I wonder if the guy with 5 bags came up and said, whoa, wait a minute, master. Are you just as happy with him as you are with me? Because you said that he had a few things and that you were going to give him many things, but you said the same thing to me. I'm going to get more than him, right? Won't I? I mean, because I'm going to get more things than he will because I had a bigger responsibility. And Jesus says, no. Life's not fair. That's the point of the parable. That's the point of the parable. He's saying, listen, you pay attention to what you're responsible for and let him pay attention to what he's responsible for. Your business is none of his. And his business is none of yours. And you'll be a lot happier when you do that. Because the parable is about being responsible with what we've been given. Not necessarily that we should be given what everybody else has been given. Now, this is where the story starts to take a kind of a turn. If this was a play, this is where the ominous music would lead us into, where we would start the Darth Vader music. Dun, 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 dun. Wow, because here comes the what? The one bagger. Here comes the one bag servant right here, all right? And everybody in the crowd's like, ooh, this is what we've been waiting for. Ooh, it's on like neck bones. Then the man who had received one bag of gold came. Now, let me tell you what's getting ready to happen here in case you don't know. In the Bible, this is what's called classic first century biblical whining. All right, now you don't really see it for what it's worth, so I'm going to give you an overvoice for it. So to kind of explain the scripture and you get the full magnitude of it. You ready? Here's how he says. He says, I knew that you were a hard man. I did. You're a hard guy. Your harvest where you have not sown and you gather, you don't even scatter no seed. So I was scared. I was afraid. So I went out and I hid your gold in the ground because I'm so scared. See, here's what belongs to you. Here's what's happening. This is a great example of first century whining. And what he's doing is he's blaming his master for giving him the money to begin with. He's saying, if you hadn't have given me this money, then I wouldn't be in this predicament. It's really your fault. Because you gave me this opportunity, and if I hadn't had this gold, if I hadn't had this money, I wouldn't have had to bury it in the ground. But now I've had to bury it in the ground, so it's basically all your fault. It's all your fault that I'm in this predicament that I'm in right now, because I know that you're a hard man, you're an intimidating man, you take advantage of opportunities, you don't reap where you sow, you're one of those go-getters, you're one of those guys that kind of seize the moment, and because you're like that and I'm not like that, then it's your fault. Why'd you give me all this money? I wouldn't have had to bury it if it wasn't for you. See, here's what's happening, and this is crucial when we talk about responsibility, Christian responsibility. You can't blame your way to a better future. You can't do it. And I'll give you a prime example of it. Most of you know that I was a drug addict for 16 years. And at the end of I don't know how much you've ever dealt with addicts before. But addicts, whether it's drugs or alcohol or porn, or gambling, addicts have moments of clarity to where God's working on them. I used to tell you guys that my mom used to pray for me, and I used to tell her, quit praying for me because it's making me miserable. Because God was after me during the last year of my addiction, which had really I was homeless, sleeping in my car, had a $300 habit a day, and I was miserable, and God was chasing me, and I was doing my best version of Jonah that I could possibly do. I was trying to outrun God. Well, you can't outrun God because he's the hide-and-seek champ. So there's no place to hide away from God. Well, I was in this moment where I was getting high in this crack house with these 5 other addicts. We were all sitting in this one room. And they all started talking about why they were addicts. And they were all blaming either their parents or circumstances or ex-wives or situations or something on everybody else. And as I was sitting there, it was like God spoke to me and said, that's you. Always making excuses. That's you. See, here's the thing. I would never say, and my parents went through a messy divorce, and it ended up being just a terrible couple of years. And I used to use that as an excuse to go out and get high. Now, I would never tell that to you because it made me seem like a whiner. It made me seem like a chump. But I would tell it to myself all the time. It was like a broken record. And sometimes the most critical and important conversations you'll ever have in your life are with you. And the more you keep telling yourself that you've got an out, that you've got somebody to blame, that it's my mom's fault, that it's my dad's fault, that it's the situation I grew up in. I'm not saying those things aren't legit, because they are. But the more we use them as an out, and here's a catch on this. You see, because in every single one of us, there's a one-bag servant that lives. In every single one of us, there's a one-bag servant that always wants to make excuses, that always wants to play the blame game, that always wants to compare ourselves to others, that always wants to have a reason why we came up short, that always wants to give us a justified excuse and a reasoning of why we can't do what we do. And in that room during that time, I realized that I had been given in to the one-bag servant for 16 years. And he had stolen 16 years of my life. Because, listen, you'll never blame your way to a better future. It's only when we can quit looking out the window at others and start looking at ourselves and say, you know what? I'm responsible for this. It wasn't because life gave me a bad hand. It wasn't even because God was against me. It's because life is just what? It's unfair. And it's uneven. And you have to play the hand that you're dealt. And so many times, if we're not careful, we'll get caught giving in to the one-bag servant that lives within all of us, that always wants to make excuses, that always wants to pass the buck, that always wants to play the blame game. Now, here's how the rest of this story plays out. His master replied, "You wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I was harvested where I had not sown, and where I had not scattered seed." This word for wicked right here, it also translates into worthless. That's probably a better word to use, because this is what Jesus is really saying. He's saying, you worthless, lazy servant. Now, hear me on this. Jesus isn't calling the man worthless, because God doesn't view anybody as worthless. You hear me? He's not saying you're worthless. He's saying the servant's action, or the servant's inaction, his inability to take responsibility. That's what's worthless. He's saying, listen, you wicked, lazy servant, you knew I was this way, and here's what you did. You didn't even take the money and put it on deposit, which would have been the easier thing to do. You wouldn't even do that, and the reason you didn't do it is because of this, because you're lazy. Because you handled it irresponsibly. You didn't want the responsibility of it, so you took the easy way out. You could have made money by just dropping it off in the bank, but instead, because you didn't want to take responsibility for it, you just dropped it in a hole and left it there. He's saying, and don't miss this because it's big when we talk about it. He's saying, you shunned your responsibility because it was the easiest thing to do, and how you behaved was just plain lazy. You didn't take responsibility when you should have taken responsibility. You were given the opportunity of a lifetime, and you threw it in a hole and covered it up. And then he goes on to say, you could have had this with the bankers, so when I returned, at least I would have received it back with interest. And then he goes on to say this, so take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. And we go, that's not fair. And Jesus goes, now you're getting it, because life's not fair. And if you behave responsibly, you'll be given more. That's not because God's playing favorites, because sometimes we think this, that God's playing favorites. It's because of the law of what? reaping and sowing. If you reap responsible things, you'll be given more. If you reap or if you sow irresponsibly, you will reap less. Why? Because that's the law in place that God has given to govern. Just like there's spiritual laws and physical laws, scientific laws that govern all of his universe, there are also laws that govern mankind. And the law of reaping and sowing is coming into play here. He goes on to say, for whoever will be given more, they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. Because, and we know this, irresponsibility in our lives is not static, meaning that it doesn't just remain where it's at. It always branches out and affects other people, doesn't it? It's not just personal. It's not just our personal little secret. It will always catch up to you because somebody will have to come along and pick up your slack where you were irresponsible in some area. And he's saying, this is what's happening here. Then he goes on to finish it up and he goes, and throw that worthless servant, there's our word, worthless servant outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So you know how most of this is preached? This is preached like this. If you don't do this and this, you're going to hell. That's not what this parable is about at all. The weeping and gnashing of teeth is not about hell. It's about this servant was on the inside. He was on the inner circle. There was a man here that was given 3 servants all of his wealth. So he was on the inner circle, wasn't he? I mean, he was the low man on the totem pole, but he was still in the inner circle of 3. That's pretty significant when somebody hands you $300,000. I mean, you were on the inner circle. Now what's happening is this. He's being thrown out to where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, where there will be angst, where there will be frustration, because he was once in, now he is on the outside looking in. And he missed the opportunity of a lifetime because he chose to be irresponsible with the opportunity of a lifetime. And the lesson there for you and I is this. Everybody gets an uneven amount of opportunity in life, don't they? We all get it. We all get an uneven amount of opportunity, but we all get opportunity. And one day, we're going to be held accountable for that share. The point of this story is this. Depending on what you get, whether you think it's even or not, you're still going to be held accountable for it. Meaning when the day of reckoning comes, and it will come for all of us, God will hold you accountable, not for what the 5-bagger had, not for what the 2-bagger had, not even for what the 1-bagger had, but for how many bags you had. That's what God's going to hold you accountable for. Not about your mom, it's not about your dad, it's not about your husband, not about your wife, it's about you. And what you did with what you had. Now, I'm going to give you this illustration, and I'm going to close with this, okay? Anybody know this guy? Oh, yeah. Jim Thorpe? How many of you heard of him before? Wow, that's good. Okay, so Jim Thorpe, if you don't know anything about him, he's a 2-time Olympic champion. He won the decathlon and the pentathlon in 1912. He was born in 1887 in what was known as the Oklahoma Territories at that time. Now it's the state of Oklahoma. As far as modern sports, and if you're a modern sports kind of guru, Jim Thorpe is at the top. Not only, he was one of the greatest athletes, pure greatest athletes to ever play any game. Not only was he a 2-time Olympic champion, he was also a professional football player, professional basketball player, and a professional baseball player. He played all 3. Which, if you know anything about two sport players, nobody's ever played all 3. Jim Thorpe's one of the few people that have ever even come close to that. Now, he was born in the Sac and Fox Native American tribe. He is the first Native American to ever win gold medals in the Olympics. Here's a neat thing about him. You see this picture? This picture was taken in the 1912 Olympics. Now, Thor, what was happening with Thorpe was this. He had qualified for the pentathlon, which is a 5-event track and field event. And he had never ran or done any of the events in the decathlon, which is a 10 event in the Olympics. So they chose him because he was the winner of the pentathlon. They chose him to do the decathlon as well, even though he had never done it before. So he goes out and competes in the pentathlon. He wins the gold medal. He's getting ready to go compete in the decathlon. All right? Now, I want you to notice something. Do you notice anything about this picture? Notice especially about his shoes. Let me blow it up for you. His shoes are uneven. You notice that? They're not the same. After the pentathlon, somebody stole his track and field shoes from him. So he got this one out of the trash can. It was 4 sizes too big for him, but he crammed newspapers in the end of it. This other one he found on the street. Okay? So he wore 2 different shoes and competed in the decathlon. In the decathlon, he finished out of the 10 events, he finished in the top 4 in all 10 events. He scored 8,413 points, which up for 25 years was an Olympic record. And he did it with shoes that didn't even fit or match. Out of the 15 events between the pentathlon and the decathlon, Thorpe won 8 of them outright with these shoes. You see, the story here is this. The lesson of it is this. Jim Thorpe could have sat on the sidelines and felt sorry for himself. And there would have been plenty of people that would have came up and said, you got a bad break. Somebody treated you wrong. People were racist. People treated you in a bad way. And I feel sorry for you. And he could have just done that. And people would have patted him on the back and said, better luck next time. But that's not what Jim Thorpe did. Jim Thorpe said, you know what, forget it. I'm going to go out and compete and throw caution to the wind. I'm going to give everything that I have. I'm going to give it my all. I refuse to give up. I refuse to give in. I refuse to give over. I am going to do my best with what I've got, because it's not about the hand you get, it's about how you play it. And that's exactly what Jim Thorpe did. And that's exactly the lesson that Jesus gives us today. Life's unfair. I know. If it's been unfair to you, I am so sorry for you. But we have a choice to remain in that if we want to and stay there. And Jim Thorpe could have done that. And if he would have done that, we wouldn't even be talking about him today. So this is the verse in this that really sticks out to me in this parable is this verse right here. After a long time, the master returned and settled accounts with his servants. See, for some people, that's going to be the happiest day of your life when you get to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. Man, you were given a crappy hand in life, but you did great. Or you were given a great hand in life, and you did great. You were given one of the worst hands in life I've ever seen, but you did great. Way to man up. Way to woman up. Way to hold your responsibility and do what God asked you to do. For some of you, listen, and I want it, if you're in our church, I want this to be the best day of your life. I do. I want you to look for your master to come over the hill and you just go, there he is, there he is, there he is, there he is. Yes! The day of reckoning has come. We're about to settle up. And I'm going to hear my master go, come here, boy. Come here, girl. Good job. Well done, good and faithful servant. So the question I'm going to leave us with in this, as we wrap this series up, is this. Am I taking responsibility for the opportunities that I've been given? Are we taking responsibilities for the opportunities that God gives us every single day? Join me as we go to the Lord in prayer. Father, in the precious name of Christ, thank you. Lord, we know that life is unfair. We know that it's uneven. We wish at times it was fair, especially for our children, especially for our grandchildren. But Father, let us be examples to them that we have to play the hand that we're dealt. We can wallow in the mire. Father, we can remain where we're at, or we can pick ourselves up. We can follow your lead, the story that Christ has told us about today. We can walk, Father, not as a one-bag servant, but as a servant that can hear the words, well done, good and faithful servant. Father, help us, I pray. Give us the courage to face these challenges, to hold them, Father, with responsibility. All for your glory we ask in the precious name of Jesus. Amen. Hey guys, have a great week. If you're still needing prayer, we've got prayer partners that will pray with you right over here today. Hey, have a great week. See you next Sunday.